Furthering down our module 2 of sociological perspectives on reproduction and family, today in this session, in lecture 10, we'll talk about the gender roles. This lecture introduces the concept of gender roles and their significance in shaping family life, reproduction, and health outcomes. Gender is not just about biological differences, but also about social meanings and expectations attached to being a male or a female. Over centuries, societies have developed distinct roles for men and women, which influence opportunities, responsibilities, and power relations. Understanding gender roles is crucial for students of sociology, public health, and community medicine. These roles are deeply embedded in culture, religion, and institutions, but they also change over time. We will examine how gender roles are created, maintained, and challenged in different contexts. This analysis will help us understand inequalities in health and social systems. The lecture will also connect gender roles to broader sociological theories. By the end, students will be able to critically reflect on how gender roles impact individual and community life. Studying gender roles is important. Why? Because gender is one of the fundamental axes along which societies are organized. Whether we consider family life, the workplace, or healthcare systems, gender differences influence access, participation, and outcomes. Despite progress in many parts of the world, gender inequality continues to persist. Women often face disadvantages in pay, political representation, and access to resources, while men are burdened with rigid expectations about masculinity. For public health students, understanding these dynamics is essential since health programs must address gendered barrier to access. Gender sensitive policies can ensure equity in services like maternal health, reproductive rights, and employment. Gender roles also intersect with class, caste, and ethnicity, making inequalities even more complex. A critical sociological approach allows us to see beyond these surface differences. The key in understanding is to design inclusive and fair systems for all. It is important to distinguish between sex and gender. Sex refers to biological differences such as anatomy, chromosomes, and reproductive systems. Gender, on the other hand, refers to the social meanings and cultural expectations attached to being a male or a female. While biology may set a foundation, societies build upon it to assign roles, behaviors, and responsibilities. For example, caring roles are often assigned to women, while leadership is associated with men. Yet, these roles are not natural. They are learned through socialization and reinforced by institutions such as family, education, religion, and media. This means gender roles can change across time and cultures. Recognizing the social basis of gender helps us challenge stereotypes and work towards equality. It also reminds us that health disparities are not only biological but also socially constructed. Gender socialization refers to the process by which individuals learn the behaviors and roles expected of them based on their gender. This process starts from early childhood and continues throughout life. Families are the first agents of socialization, teaching boys and girls how to behave differently. Schools, media, peers, and religious institutions further reinforce these norms. For examples, boys may be encouraged to be strong and assertive, while girls may be praised for being nurturing and obedient. Toys, clothing, and even career advice often reflect gendered expectations. Over time, These repeated messages shape identity, aspirations, and self worth. While gender socialization helps societies maintain continuity, it also restricts individuals by limiting choices. Understanding the process is essential if we are to promote gender equality and challenge discriminatory practices. In traditional societies, gender roles are often rigid and clearly defined. Men are usually responsible for public activities such as hunting, farming, or wage work, while women are tied to domestic responsibilities of childbearing and caregiving. Patriarchal family systems place men as head of households and decision makers, while women have limited autonomy. These roles are often justified by cultural or religious traditions, making them deeply entrenched. Women's contributions in these societies are undervalued, even though their labor sustains families and communities. Men, on the other hand, are expected to provide for the family and exercise authority. Such rigid roles have significant implications for access to resources, health, and education. Understanding traditional gender roles is crucial for analyzing the persistence of inequality and the slow pace of social change. Modern societies have witnessed significant changes in gender roles, with more women participating in education, employment, and public life. Structures have also shifted, with dual income households becoming more common. Men are increasingly involved in caregiving while women pursue careers outside the home. However, these changes coexist with persistent inequalities. Women still earn less, and men, on average, face barriers in leadership positions and women still earn less than men on average, face barriers in leadership positions, and shoulder a disproportionate share of domestic responsibilities. Men too face pressure to conform to rigid ideals of masculinity, which can impact their mental health and relationships. Thus, while modern societies show greater flexibility, inequality continues in new forms. Recognizing these shifts allows us to understand both progress and ongoing challenges in gender relations. Now, from a functionalist perspective, gender roles are seen as complementary and necessary for stability of the society. Men are typically assigned instrumental roles such as providing income, while women take expressive roles like caregiving and nurturing. This division of labor is viewed as functional because it ensures that both economic and emotional needs of families are met. Functionalists argue that such arrangements maintain order and reduce conflict within households. However, critics point out that this view legitimizes inequality by naturalizing male and dominance and restricting women roles. In contemporary context, the functionalist perspective is limited because it fails to account for changing realities, where both men and women contribute in diverse ways. Nonetheless, it provides a useful framework for understanding how traditional gender roles were justified as necessary for social stability. Now, conflict theory provides a contrasting lens, arguing that gender roles are a source of inequality and oppression. Men, as a dominant group, have historically controlled resources, decision making, and public power. Women, on the other hand, have been relegated to roles that limit autonomy and reinforce dependency. This unequal arrangement benefits men at the expense of women, creating structural exploitation. Families, workplaces, and institutions become arenas where power struggles are constantly negotiated. The conflict perspective highlights how patriarchy and capitalism reinforce gender hierarchies. It also explains why women's struggles for equality often meet resistance from entrenched interests. This theory emphasizes that inequality is not natural but socially constructed, and change is only possible through challenging these power relations. The third, the feminist theory, specifically challenged the legitimacy of patriarchy and male dominance in defining gender roles. They argue that roles traditionally assigned to men and women are not natural, but socially constructed to maintain inequality. Different strands of feminism provide nuanced perspectives. Liberal feminists emphasize legal reforms and equal opportunities. Radical feminists critique patriarchy as a system of domination, and socialist feminists analyze the link between capitalism and gender inequality. Collectively, these perspectives highlight how gender roles can and must be transformed to achieve justice. Feminist insights have been instrumental in policy reforms around education, employment, and reproductive rights. For students, this perspective provides a critical framework to analyze and challenge gender inequality in all spheres of life. Intersectionality is a crucial concept in understanding gender roles. It emphasizes that people's experiences are not shaped by gender alone, but also by class, caste, ethnicity, religion, and other identities. For example, the gender roles of an upper class urban woman are very different from those of a Dalit woman in a rural area. Intersectionality shows this inequality is layered, and the burden of discrimination is heavier for those facing multiple forms of marginalization. In migration, employment, or healthcare, these intersecting identities determine access to opportunities and resources. An intersectional approach is essential in both research and policy design to ensure inclusivity. Without it, interventions risk benefiting only certain groups while leaving others behind. This framework enriches our analysis and helps us capture the full role of gender in the society. The division of labor along gender lines has been a cornerstone of most societies. Traditionally, women have been responsible for domestic roles while men have dominated wage labor and public life. This arrangement has historically undervalued women's unpaid housework, even though it is essential for sustaining families and economies. In modern societies, women increasingly participate in wage labor, but the burden of domestic responsibilities still remains. This creates what is called a double burden, where women must manage both the household and their economic roles for the family. Men too face pressure to prove themselves as breadwinners, reinforcing rigid masculinity norms. Men too face pressure to provide themselves as breadwinners, reinforcing rigid masculinity norms. This unequal division perpetuates economic social inequity. Recognizing and redistributing this unequal division perpetuates economic and social inequality. Recognizing and redistributing unpaid labor is essential for achieving gender justice. Gender plays a decisive role in shaping family dynamics. In many societies, authority within families has traditionally been male centered and men making key financial and social decisions. Women, meanwhile, are often positioned as caregivers and emotional anchors of the household, responsible for maintaining harmony. However, this shift from joint to nuclear families has altered these dynamics, with women increasingly sharing authority and decision making. Economic participation has further empowered women to challenge traditional roles. Yet, patriarchal attitudes persist, limiting women's autonomy. Family dynamics often involve constant negotiation of roles, especially around childcare, financial management, and reproductive decisions. These negotiations reflect broader societal struggle over gender equality. Understanding family dynamics through a gender lens allows us to appreciate both progress and persistent barriers. Education is the most powerful tool for transforming gender roles. Access to education empowers women and girls by expanding their opportunities, skills, and decision making power. Despite progress, gender gaps in education remain in many regions, particularly rural areas. Barriers include poverty, cultural norms that prioritize boys' education, and safety concern for girls traveling to schools. Dropout rates are often higher for girls, especially during adolescence due to child marriage or household responsibilities. Inclusive policies, scholarships, and safe learning environments are critical to addressing these gaps. Men and boys also benefit from gender sensitive education as it challenges stereotypes and promotes equality. Education not only transforms individuals but also impacts entire communities, breaking cycles of poverty and discrimination. Gender equality in education is thus central to sustainable development. Work participation reflects deep gender inequalities. Women's labor force participation has risen globally, but they remain concentrated in informal, insecure, and low paid jobs. In many countries, women dominate sectors such as domestic work, agriculture, and services, which are undervalued economically. In formal sectors, women encounter barriers such as glass ceiling, which limits their advancement to top positions. Men, by contrast, continue to dominate leadership roles and political decision making. Workplace discrimination, unequal pay, and lack of supportive policies for childcare further exacerbates these inequalities. At the same time, men face rigid expectations to be primary earners, leading to stress and mental health challenges. Achieving workplace equality requires systemic reforms, including maternity and paternity benefits, equal pay, and recognition of unpaid labor. Without these changes, gender disparities in work will always persist. Political representation is a key area where gender inequality is starkly visible. Women remain significantly underrepresented in parliaments, local councils, and leadership positions across the world. Quotas and reservations have been used to strategize to increase women's participation with mixed results. Barriers to entry include gender stereotypes, lack of funding, and even violence or intimidation. Despite these obstacles, evidence shows that when women are represented, despite these obstacles, evidence shows that when women are represented, governance improves. Women leaders are more likely to focus on issues such as education, healthcare, and social welfare. Representation also challenges patriarchal norms and inspires future generations. Ensuring political equality requires structural reforms, supportive policies, and cultural shifts. Empowering women in politics is not just a matter of fairness, it enhances democratic legitimacy and social justice. Health outcomes are deeply influenced by gender roles. Women's health needs, particularly reproductive and maternal health, have often been neglected or inadequately addressed. Gender bias in medical research means that men's experiences are taken as norm, leaving women underrepresented. At the same time, men face gendered pressures that affect mental health, such as expectations of toughness and emotional restraint. Both men and women suffer when health systems ignore gender dynamics. Women are also more vulnerable to gender based violence, which directly impacts health. Men's reluctance to seek care due to stigma further worsens outcomes. Addressing these disparities requires gender sensitive health policies which account for social and cultural barriers. Such approaches improve not only health outcomes but also equity within communities. Patriarchy. It also remains one of the most powerful structures shaping gender roles. It refers to a system where men dominate in terms of autonomy, resources, and decision making, while women's roles are undervalued and restricted. Patriarchal norms justify inequality by framing it as a natural or divinely sanctioned. Women are often confined to subordinate roles within the families and communities. However, resistance to patriarchy has grown over time, with women's movements, education, and policy reforms challenging these structures. Change is gradual but visible as more women enter leadership, education, and employment. Men too are beginning to question the pressures of patriarchy, which limit their emotional expression and well being. Recognizing patriarchy as a system is the first step towards dismantling it. Its persistence highlights the need of continued advocacy and structural reforms. Reproduction is one of the most gendered areas of life. Women bear disproportionate responsibilities for pregnancy, childbirth, and childcare, while men roles are often reduced to provision with little emphasis on caregiving or shared responsibilities. This imbalance reinforces the stereotype that reproduction is a women's issue, ignoring men's role in family planning and childcare. Inequality in reproductive responsibilities also affects women's health, education, and employment opportunities. Reproductive health is closely tied to gender equality, to access to contraception, safe childbirth, and healthcare, which empowers women. Shared responsibility, where men actively participate in childcare and family planning, improves outcomes for families and societies. Promoting this shift requires education, policy interventions, and cultural change. Reproductive roles must be seen as collective and not solely a responsibility of the female. Masculinity, like femininity, is socially constructed. Societies often expect men to be strong, authoritative, and primary providers. While these expectations confer privilege, they also impose heavy pressures. Men may feel compelled to suppress emotions, work excessively, and avoid seeking help for health issues. Such pressures contribute to stress, violence, and mental health problems. However, alternative masculinities are emerging, challenging these rigid stereotypes. These include models of fatherhood that emphasize nurturing or professional values, roles that emphasize on cooperation over aggression. Recognizing the diversity of masculinities helps reduce the stigma men face when diverging from norms. It also fosters healthier relationships and societies. Expanding our understanding about masculinity is essential to promote gender equality for all. Femininity is equally shaped by cultural expectations. In many societies, women are idealized for their beauty, caregiving, and obedience. These expectations limit the way women can express themselves or often reinforces dependency. Such ideals restrict women's opportunities and self-esteem. However, femininity is not fixed. It can be redefined to emphasize strength, leadership, and independence. Women's movements and changing social attitudes have challenged traditional femininity, promoting empowerment and self expression. By broadening the meaning of femininity, societies allow women greater freedom and equality. Redefining femininity is a crucial step toward dismantling of these rigid gender roles. Gender does not operate in isolation but intersects with other social categories. Intersectionality highlights how individuals experience multiple forms of discrimination simultaneously. Often, intersectionality highlights how individuals experience multiple forms of discrimination simultaneously, often amplifying the disadvantages. For instance, poor women in rural areas may face gender bias, economic exclusion, and limited access to services. Similarly, women from marginalized populations may experience greater violence, reduced opportunities, and lack of representation. Intersectionality also applies to men who fall outside the dominant culture norms, such as lower caste men facing stigma alongside the expectations of masculinity. Effective policies need to address these overlapping inequalities, not just gender in isolation. Religion and culture play profound roles in defining gender expectations. Sacred texts and religious doctrines are often interpreted in ways that reinforce patriarchal authority, prescribing obedience for women and leadership for men. Cultural rituals such as marriage ceremonies or initiation rites further cement these roles. However, religion and culture are not static. Reform movements within many faiths have challenged patriarchal interpretations, highlighting values of equality and justice. Women leaders, religious scholars, and activists are reinterpreting texts and rituals to affirm women's rights. Understanding the cultural and religious roots of gender roles helps explain their persistence. Media is one of the most influential forces shaping gender roles. Television, film, advertising, and digital platforms often reproduce stereotypes. Women showing women as caregivers, objects of beauty, or passive supporters, while men are depicted as strong, decisive, and dominant. These portrayals reinforce cultural ideas and shape public perceptions. However, media also provides opportunities to challenge these norms. Alternative portrayals, such as women in leadership roles or men as caregivers, are becoming more visible. Social media amplifies diverse voices, allowing marginalized groups to redefine narratives. Media literacy is essential to help audiences critically evaluate messages. By promoting inclusive representations, media can play a transformative role in dismantling stereotypes and fostering gender equality. Law and policy are critical in shaping gender roles. Legal systems both reflect existing gender norms and regulate them through rights and responsibilities. In recent decades, reforms have addressed issues such as domestic violence, sexual harassment, and workplace discrimination. However, significant gaps remain between law and practice. Many women lack access to justice due to social stigma, financial barriers, or weak enforcements. Men may also face challenges when laws fail to recognize evolving gender dynamics such as paternity leave. Advocacy by civil society organizations ensures that laws translate into meaningful change. Without sustained accountability, reforms risk being symbolic rather than substantiative. A gender sensitive legal framework backed by implementation is crucial for advancing equality. Gender roles are not static but evolve across generations. Older generations often hold on to traditional norms, valuing women as homemakers and men as providers. Younger people exposed to education, media, and global discourse increasingly question these roles. This generational divide can create tensions within families, workplace, and communities. Parents may resist daughters' pursuit of careers and sons' involvement in caregiving. Yet these shifts are reshaping societies, with new norms emerging that value equality and shared responsibilities. Intergenerational dialogues are important for bridging divides and fostering mutual understanding. By recognizing generational differences, societies can manage change constructively and reduce conflict. Rural and urban contexts shape gender roles differently. In rural areas, traditional norms are often more rigid, with women restricted to domestic labor and men to agricultural work. Urbanization, by contrast, expands opportunities for women in education, employment, and social participation. Migration also shapes gender roles as families adapt to new economic and cultural realities. However, inequalities persist in both settings. Men in rural areas may experience pressure to uphold traditional masculinity, while urban men navigate new expectations. Recognizing these contextual differences is important for designing effective policies. Globalization has had profound effects on gender roles worldwide. It challenges traditional norms by creating new opportunities for women in global local markets. Migrant women, for example, work in healthcare, domestic labor, and manufacturing across borders. Cultural exchange through travel, media, and education also reshapes gender roles. Men too face challenges adapting from shifting labor markets and expectations, while women's challenges are often concentrated in low wage and insecure jobs. Policies that protect workers' rights and promote fair participation are essential. Gender must be the center of globalization debates to ensure equitable outcomes. Social movements have been critical in transforming gender roles. Women's movements worldwide have fought for suffrage, reproductive rights, equal pay, and protection from violence. More recently, men's groups have emerged to challenge restrictive masculinity norms and promoting healthier gender relations. Intersectional activism has gained momentum. Movements like Me Too or campaigns for equal pay have highlighted systemic injustices and pressured institutions to act. Social movements show that gender roles are neither natural nor fixed, but socially constructed and are contestable. The future of gender roles points towards greater equality and flexibilities. Families are moving towards shared responsibilities, with men increasingly involved in caregiving and women advancing in careers. Workplaces and politics have become more inclusive in reforms supporting representation and equal opportunities, yet the struggles remain. Technology too may transform roles by enabling new forms of work and social engagement. Future will likely involve negotiation as old norms collide with new aspiration. Gender equality is not inevitable, it requires deliberate action. In conclusion, gender roles are socially constructed, deeply embedded in culture, but constantly evolving. While significant progress has been made in areas such as education, work, participation, and representation, inequalities remain stubborn. These roles shape not only individuals but also families, communities, and entire societies. Critical reflection is essential to question stereotypes and challenge systems of inequality. By understanding the complexities of gender roles, we equip ourselves to create a more equitable future. Thank you.